Martin Blake is a promising medical student undergoing residency at a hospital in Southern California. One of his patients, Mr. Sanchez, doesn't speak English. Unable to find any colleagues with knowledge of the Spanish language, Martin attempted to improvise. Later during a briefing, doctors discussed patients' medical histories. Right after that, Martin approached the department head and asked if he could apply for a grant. Mr. Whalens was surprised because Martin had only been working for 6 days. However, the department head hinted that a good doctor could always expect recognition. When Martin asked a nurse to take a patient's blood for analysis, she refused under the pretext of being busy. Obviously, the junior medical staff didn't yet respect the new doctor. Martin had to do it himself. The patient turned out to be a pretty young girl. After his shift, Martin returned to his small, unfurnished apartment. He received a package from his mom as a reminder of home. The family photo was supposed to remind him of how proud the parents are of him. Martin wrote a response letter and later attended a party in the evening. Dan Page, Martin's friend and colleague, introduced him to Christine, the daughter of a renowned cardiothoracic surgeon. Martin returned to his empty apartment. Furniture was scarce, but he was just beginning to settle in at his new place. Martin's patient, Diane Nixon, was feeling unwell. When she asked what was wrong, Martin explained it was pyelonephritis, a kidney infection. The doctor examined the patient. With timely treatment, pyelonephritis is not life-threatening. Diane was visited by her relatives and her boyfriend Rich. Martin left to not interfere. An indignant nurse approached him, who took him to Mr. Sanchez's ward. The man was having an allergic reaction to penicillin. Martin is sure there were no allergies in the patient's medical record. Perhaps Teresa had tampered with the records because she has something against the new doctor. In the dining room, Jimmy, an orderly, joined Martin. Apologizing, Martin almost immediately left and took a seat at Mr. Whalens' table. Martin is worried that the incident with Mr. Sanchez will affect his personal record. Dr. Whalens assured him not to worry, although that was not a good thing. In any case, Dr. Whalens couldn't alter the reports. Martin returned home in a bad mood, fearing for his future medical career. In the morning, Martin overheard Diane arguing on the phone with her boyfriend. Later, she complained to the doctor about Rich. She wants to break up with him but is not sure yet. Teresa continues to pick on Martin, saying that his handwriting is absolutely illegible. Martin was in the elevator with Jimmy, who was behaving rather swaggeringly. Martin was outraged that the junior staff disrespects doctors, especially Teresa. Jimmy joked that Martin could solve that problem with poison. In the evening, Martin went into his patient's ward. Diane asked if she was cured. Martin replied that she was almost cured. Diane is truly grateful to the doctor and wants the nurse to stop picking on him. Martin was pleased to hear these kind words. Dr. Whalens decided to discharge Diane Nixon, although Martin tried to object. The next morning, Mr. Nixon, Diane's father, thanked Martin for everything. The man also invited the doctor to a family dinner on Friday. Martin agreed. Before meeting Diane, Martin was nervous and rehearsed his speech in front of the mirror. Buying a bottle of wine, he arrived at the Nixons' house. The whole family was very glad to see the doctor who helped Diane. However, Martin was disappointed that Diane herself was not present. It turned out she had left because she needed to have a serious conversation with Rich. During dinner, Martin was asked what it's like to be a doctor. Martin said it's a big responsibility. Diane's sister, Valerie, was actively flirting with a charming doctor. The younger brother Donnie teased her, leading to a small altercation between the brother and sister. Apologizing, Martin retreated to the bathroom. On the shelf, he noticed medication prescribed to Diane. While the family wasn't looking, Martin entered Diane's room. He can't stop thinking about this girl who was truly a good patient. Under the pretext of work, Martin left the Nixons' house earlier. No one knew he had stolen a photo of Diane. All night, Martin admired it. After the morning briefing, Dr. Whalens asked Martin to stay for a personal conversation. When Whalens asked the intern why he decided to become a doctor, Martin said that above all he wanted to earn respect from others. Martin also mentioned that Nurse Teresa treats him like a nobody, and it's unfair. In the dining room, Martin had lunch almost alone. Unlike him, Dan easily connected with colleagues. But Martin was clearly superfluous in their company. Martin received a voicemail from Valerie, Diane's sister. The girl again invited the doctor over and asked him to call back. Martin decided to accept the invitation and visited the Nixons' house again. When Martin entered the bathroom, he switched Diane's medication so that she would start to get worse. In this way, Martin wanted to make Diane go back to the hospital. And it worked. Soon Diane was back in the hospital with a worsening of her illness. The doctor explained that sometimes the infection resists antibiotics. On the same morning, Mr. Sanchez experienced an anaphylactic shock. Obviously it wasn't an allergy to penicillin, but something else. During the proceedings, it became clear that it was indeed not Martin's mistake. Martin told Waylands that Teresa probably mixed up the medications. Waylands intends to look into it. At the end of the shift, Martin visited Diane in her ward and said that he was very sorry. But Diane wasn't too upset because she didn't want to go back to school so soon. Martin said he prescribed her a new medication. Later, secretly from everyone, he took some medications and syringes. While Diane slept, Martin injected this medication into her drip. In the corridor, Martin ran into Nurse Marianne, who said she was being fired. It was she who mixed up the medications for Mr. Sanchez, not Teresa. Hearing this, Martin was upset. He hoped it was Teresa. In the restroom, Martin disposed of the syringes. The next morning, Diane had a fever. This means she'll have to stay in the hospital for a few more days. But Martin wants more of it. He wants Diane to get even worse. When he was about to steal the medication again, he caught Jimmy with one of the patients. Of course this is unacceptable. Martin ordered to take the patient back to the ward. Alone, the doctor stole medications again, after which he injected it into the drip of sleeping Diane. When Teresa entered the ward, Martin had already finished, so the nurse didn't see anything suspicious. The only thing that surprised Teresa was the fact that Martin was at work on his day off. Before leaving, Martin replaced Diane's pills with another patient's pills. In the morning during the briefing, doctors discussed Diane's case. Despite the treatment, the patient's condition continues to deteriorate. Diane is really very sick. Martin explained that they need to start a course of new antibiotics, otherwise sepsis may develop. Diane is ignoring calls from Rich. She doesn't want to see or hear him right now. Seeing that Rich came with an inflatable balloon, Martin didn't let him into the ward. Asking the doctor to give Diane the balloon, the guy was forced to leave with nothing. Of course Martin had no intention of passing on the gift from the boyfriend to Diane. Since this is a difficult case, an expert visited Diane's ward. Despite her weakness, the girl can't sleep. Martin assured her that everything would be fine. Diane admitted that after being discharged from the hospital, she led an unhealthy lifestyle. Now she fears that this has led to a recurrence of the illness. Martin said that this was indeed the case. Doctors are puzzled by Diane's case. Neither Dr. Waylands nor the expert has any idea how to help the girl. But they do what they can. The expert asked Martin to go down to the parking lot and retrieve the sepsis treatment protocol from his car. Sitting in the car, Martin envisioned that someday he would be as respected as that man. Diane ended up on the operating table. Although Martin is not a surgeon but a therapist, he was there to support her. Diane fell asleep under anesthesia. When Diane woke up in her ward, Martin was again by her side. The girl said she felt like in a fog. Martin assured her that this was a normal reaction. Suddenly the patient asked the doctor if he was married. Martin evasively replied that everything was complicated. Diane thought that the doctor liked her sister. However, Martin denied this. Right during the conversation, Diane fell asleep due to weakness. Unable to restrain himself, Martin kissed her. Martin dozed off, and when he woke up, he saw that Diane was not in the ward. Martin aggressively demanded answers from the nurse about where the patient was. In confusion, Teresa said that the patient had been taken to the intensive care unit. Martin immediately rushed to the intensive care unit. It turned out that Diane had a cardiac arrest. Doctors tried to resuscitate her for a long time, but in vain. The doctors were powerless to do anything. Diane passed away. Looking at her, Martin couldn't hold back his tears. Being a doctor, he took the Hippocratic Oath and was supposed to save lives, not the other way around. Martin couldn't recover for a long time. His selfishness pushed him to an unforgivable step. The next day, Teresa told Martin that she regrets it. She really feels sorry for that girl. Dr. Waylands called Martin to his office. Since Martin lost a patient for the first time, the head of the department wants to make sure that Martin's mental state is normal. No one blames him, as it is an integral part of the medical profession. During this conversation, a psychiatrist was present, asking Martin various questions. Mr. Nixon showed up at the hospital and accused Martin of Diane's demise. But Dr. Waylands assured that there is no medical staff mistake here. The patient suffered from a severe form of pyelonephritis. Dan Page supported Martin in such a difficult moment. But only Martin knows what really happened. His life will never be the same. Martin fell into deep depression. Despite this, he returned to work. Jimmy asked him to go down to the basement in 5 minutes for a personal conversation. The orderly said that he is concerned about some ethical issue. The thing is, he found Diane's diary in the ward and read it. The diary entries give reason to believe that Martin had an affair with the patient. Now Jimmy is contemplating whether he should ethically hand over the diary to the doctor's superiors. Martin directly asked Jimmy what he wants in return. The orderly said he wants access to some euphoria-inducing substances. Martin could give Jimmy a prescription, but it's very risky. Buying some harmless medication at the pharmacy, Martin painted the pills yellow at home in the evening. The next day at work, he substituted the medication and brought Jimmy 4 tablets. Martin demanded the diary, but Jimmy has other plans. He intends to continue blackmailing the doctor. In the dining room, Dan joined Martin at his table. Meanwhile, Martin caught glances from Jimmy. After a tough shift, the medical staff gathered at the bar to have a drink. The expert is interested in Diane's case. He intends to find out the cause of cardiac arrest and hopes for Martin's help, as he should have retained all the records. At home, Martin, using improvised materials, synthesized some substance. The next day, he handed Jimmy a small packet with this substance. Jimmy again refused to give him the diary. A few minutes later, Jimmy began to feel unwell. Martin locked him in a utility room, ensuring that no one would come to his aid. Jimmy resisted as much as he could, but the poisoning was too severe. Martin pretended to try to resuscitate Jimmy and called for help. However, Jimmy quickly passed away. Taking advantage of the chaos, Martin climbed into Jimmy's locker and retrieved the diary. Now the doctor's reputation would be saved. The police arrived at the hospital. A detective interviewed the medical staff. Dr. Whalens mentioned that nurses had long complained about Jimmy's strange behavior. Perhaps he had addiction problems. At home, Martin read Diane's diary, where she wrote about her feelings for him and also for Rich. In the morning, Martin woke up to a knock on the door. The detective wants to ask him a few more questions. Martin said he barely knew Jimmy. The detective is aware that none of the doctors liked the orderly. This gives reason to believe that someone from the doctors could have poisoned him. Seeing Diane's diary on the floor, Martin got nervous, and picking it up, went to the bathroom. He then attempted to flush the diary down the toilet, but the paper clogged the plumbing, and water spilled over. Martin climbed out the window and came to the shore, recalling one of the last conversations with Diane. When Diane had asked him earlier how he imagined his demise, Martin had replied that he imagined it as if he were going into the ocean and disappearing without a trace. In reality, Martin returned to his house through the window and hastily disposed of the soaked pages. Then Martin pretended that he urgently needed to go to work. The detective had no more questions, so he thanked the doctor for his help. Martin returned to his duties as if nothing had happened.